Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of CMI, and I'd like to welcome you to this special edition of Better Managers Briefing, brought to you live from London, complete with the occasional siren. Joining me today is a very special guest who's kicking off our special 75th anniversary series. CMI is 75 next year, and we are interviewing rock star CEOs on what the next 75 years of management and leadership should look like. Kicking us off first in the series is an old friend from Procter & Gamble who's gone on to great heights, Allison Kirkby. She is CEO and president of Telia, Sweden's largest telecoms company. She has extensive experience on boards, including the BT board, and she is ranked number 28 in Fortune's most powerful female leader list. So a great series of accomplishments, and is here with us today to talk all things management and leadership for the future. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you, Anne. Delighted to be here. And clearly there's room for improvement to go from 28 to 1.
There you go. Well, you've still got that time. Now, I did say that CMI was 75. And I also know that you're in a very special place today. And next year, our 75th year is also the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Would you care to give us both a shout out?
Absolutely. Congratulations on 75-year anniversary, Anne, and delighted to be here with you today. And I'm in a very appropriate place because home for me when I'm not in Stockholm is Windsor. So I'll give a wave to the Queen now because she is my neighbour a little bit further down the street.
Well, thanks for that. Now, Allison, let me kick off with what you think should be at the core of professional and great management. Do you think that values, ethics, and culture should be at the heart? And if so, why? And how do you manifest that in your own everyday practice?
Well, I think I'd like to turn that around. How can an organization not have values, ethics, and culture at its center? You know, it all starts with a purpose. Companies exist for a reason, and they need to stand for something. And if the values and the ethics and the culture don't enable that ultimate ambition and purpose, then there's going to be something that very much goes wrong. At Telia, we call our purpose our North Star. And our values are a key enabler. It's the fabric of how we get there. So when I arrived just over 16 months ago, we launched a new purpose to reinvent better connected living. The previous purpose was about becoming a next generation telco. But what I realized was our purpose was not embracing our customers, and it wasn't embracing our people, and it wasn't embracing the need for us to change. And it hadn't really incorporated our values. And so our purpose now of reinventing better is to be better for ourselves, for our customers, for our societies we serve. And really the values of dare, care, and simplify embraces everything that we want our people to be. So my view is you have to have strong values, culture, and ethics to deliver on corporate ambition. And those values and ethics and culture need to be in everybody that you hire and recruit and develop in your business, because they're your ambassadors to the outside world.
Yeah, that I really like that. Did I hear you say dare, care, and simplify are your values?
That's our value.
Wow.
And it actually came from, you know, Telia went through a phase where it had gone wrong in Eurasia. And its ethics actually became questioned because of some of the partners that they'd worked with and corruption. And those values came into place after that, because there was a fear that by addressing the ethical piece, the company would become fearful of being ambitious and being entrepreneurial. So it came in that we have to care for the societies and our customers, but we still have to dare. And then every telco in the world needs to simplify. But that's our values: dare, care, and simplify.
Oh, those are great, and I would say lots of organizations need to simplify. But moving on, and tell us a little bit about the challenges that you see that exist now for managers and leaders that existed at the start of your career. What do you think is still a challenge?
I think the challenge is still, how do you get onto the ladder in the very beginning, and then how do you get noticed? So as an individual, as a manager who's wanting to develop and grow, how do you first get there, and how do you get the chance to climb the ladder by being noticed? Mm-hmm. And I think that is the case today as it was when I was starting out. Whereas yes, it's much flatter organizations today and there's less hierarchy, but there's more and more competition. And when managers are much more virtual and they're not there to meet you and interview you, how do you get noticed the same? So I think getting onto the ladder in the first place, particularly if you don't conform to what the rest of the workforce or the environment looks like, is just as difficult as it was before. And I think it's actually becoming increasingly more difficult. And then it's, how do you get noticed along the way? Particularly if you're not the stereotypical norm within that company. So I'd say those pieces haven't changed at all. And in a world with rising inequality, I think there's a real danger that the management of the future becomes even more polarized around one stereotype.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot more about that a bit later on in the broadcast. But how did you overcome the challenge of getting noticed? And what advice would you give to those of us that on the broadcast that are trying to get noticed?
I think I very much align to the values of Telia. I dare. I've always, I'm a bit fearless. I've always aimed to achieve as much as I possibly can in my life in general. And I think it's because I had a father that died very young. And so for me, it was always just putting myself out of my comfort zone every now and again to try something new and see what would happen. And so I dared to put myself forward for roles. I dared to put myself into situations that other people might have chosen not to. And so the advice I always give, particularly young, talented women, is, be brave, be bold, get out your comfort zone, because you only learn and develop by getting out of your comfort zone. And that has, I've achieved way more than I could ever have imagined as a 16-year-old school leaver who never went to university. And I think it's because I did come from a slightly different background and a different context. I had to dare to do things a bit differently, and that allowed me in the end to stand out. So I hope.
I think that's a great example. And how specifically, as a 16-year-old school leaver, can you take us back? What was that specific example where you dared to put yourself out of your comfort zone?
First of all, well, there's many stories. First of all, I made myself the most successful Avon lady in Glasgow when I was only 14, and I should have been 18. And I was signed up under my father's name because he was the only above 18-year-old at home that night when I signed up. Now, I think the big brave decision I took was I didn't go to university. It was going to be a real difficult situation for my mother to support me. And so I decided, how am I going to get a profession without going to university? And I discovered that the Scottish whisky industry used to take 2 school leavers a year and train you through day release at college to become an accountant and give you work experience. And I had worked out I loved being in a working environment. I like to earn my own money. And so I decided to do that instead of university. So I was the first female in the trainee accountant scheme. And therefore I became the first female ever to fill a cask of whiskey in one of the spirit stores in Glasgow as well. So so that was you know, a lot of my teachers, you know, family, friends were like, Alison, you've got to go to university. You're a clever kid. And I said, well, is there another way that it doesn't put financial pressure on the family? So I guess that's my 16-year-old example.
What a fabulous story, and well done you. And as we know, apprenticeships now are increasingly competing with degrees because, you know, they give vital experience. And I know you were also part of a chartered professional body, right, from a young age, flying the flag.
Exactly. Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. And so that very much helped me get the profession that I think gave me the piece of paper that reassured companies like Procter & Gamble that I did have a professional qualification beyond school.
That's super. What a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Now, obviously, you have been involved with many institutions. You now lead a very large one. And how do you find the right balance as a leader between continuity and change?
Yeah, well, I think you've got, in this world of rapid change that we're now seeing, companies are having to change all of the time. And I think change has become more important than it ever was before. You cannot stand still. And therefore, your talent pool and your people cannot stand still either, because if they don't develop, the company won't develop. And we're all facing different competitors every day as well. So, you know, for us as an industry, if you think about, first of all, we started out, we were all, you know, owned by the government. We were full of engineers. And then governments decided they wanted more competition. And so the competitors brought in a more customer focus, a more brand focus. So we had to start building our engineering skills to become more brand and customer focused. That's why people like from Procter & Gamble started going to the telco industry. Now we're facing a world where we're being disrupted by the hyperscalers and rapid digitalization. We have to embrace it. So now we still need the engineers to be running our networks, but increasingly we need data scientists, we need analysts, we need developers. That's something that we didn't have before. So I think, and of course, we still need great people running and operating our networks and have that continuity and institutional knowledge that built those networks. But we have to be reskilling and upskilling all of the time. And so what we're doing, because we're going through a massive transformation at the moment, and we will shrink our workforce from above 20,000 to around 15,000 in the next 5 years, we are looking, how do we start to reskill and upskill so that we can still keep the continuity in the company, but start to have the skills we need to compete in the future. And that's a challenge because telcos don't always attract the data scientists and the developers that we need to develop. And so the employer brand therefore has to keep developing so that we can retain the best of the past and that continuity and make those people still proud of the continuity they bring, but complement them with the new skills and the new talent that we need to be able to stay competitive in the marketplace. So I think that striking the balance between continuity and change is vital for corporate evolution nowadays.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a daily one that you have to make and think hard about. And you know, I think it's really great that you're reskilling and upskilling existing people as well as bringing in new ones as part of that. Something that we also support. Now, we touched on this earlier, where you said, you know, especially women, get yourself out of your comfort zone. But as a leader, how do you make sure that as many women as men fully achieve their management ambitions? Share with us.
Well, clearly it all starts with the corporate purpose. And if we want to reinvent better for our customers, we need to have an organization that is representative of the diversity of our customers. And that's not just gender diversity, it's also much broader than that. But if we look at women alone, we have, you know, you have to start from the top and you have to start from the bottom, and then you close the gaps in between. And so we do a pretty good job of being representative at the bottom. It's how we then develop them, but then they need role models. And so our ambition is by 2025 to have 50% of our top leaders are female. So that's the top 150 in the company. It will be 70%. We are 40% women today, and we're heading for 50% by 2025. We are at the executive team, we are between 30 and 40%. So we're 4 of 13 that are women. So we've got a bit more work to do there than actually in the next level down, but then it's how you bring them up. So for me, it's role models and unfortunately setting targets. But if you don't set a target, you get what you measure. And so we have a very clear ambition, and also it also starts with our board and our owners. You know, our owners want representation in the board, and so we have a good 50-50 percentage in the board. And actually we now also have an ex-P&G friend on my board in Luisa Delgado.
Great.
Yes, so that's good for me because she speaks the same language. So yeah, that is what we are doing. And then in terms of what are we doing, you know, we are clearly teaching inclusive practices and ensuring inclusivity is really thought about at the recruitment level. But I personally really push the gender balance agenda at Telia, because as an industry, we are atrocious at gender balance. I think there's only 5 out of 300 CEOs in telco that are women, something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you know, and we'll come on to talk about the importance of sponsorship. I know I've heard you speak on that, but how do you get to a point where all managers know how to support and sponsor women, managers throughout the organization? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it all starts with leadership, Anne. And, you know, you and I both grew up in the best place ever to learn leadership at its best. And leadership, you know, requires deep engagement with your organization. And, you know, it's one of the 5 E's that we were taught. And therefore, you need to know, are your leaders engaging in an inclusive way so that they're bringing everybody with them and they're giving everybody a fair chance of representation. And, you know, we gather that information through our pulse surveys, and we monitor how leaders are developing the women in their team relative to the men in their team. Are they giving them the same chances? And as I said earlier, it goes to recruitment. We now have trained all of our recruiters on inclusive behaviors to avoid any bias as they review candidates, either on paper or in person. And then, you know, we just monitor that through our pulse, as I said, our pulse surveys and our leadership development programs. But, you know, I have taken Procter & Gamble's 5 E's to become 4 E's for Telia and really push the envision, the engage, the enable, and the execute. And if we believe that we'll only be successful at executing on our strategy if we represent the customers, the diversity of the customers we have in our own organization, and we're ensuring that our leaders are able to engage everybody, no matter their background, then that is a way of us ensuring that our leaders are role modeling what we want in the future.
Sure, and you mentioned earlier, it's not just gender, there are many aspects of diversity. Obviously, one of those that you did also mention is ethnicity. A lot of managers we know just aren't comfortable talking about race. And what are you doing there to get managers comfortable in talking about race? And tell us a little bit about your ethnicity goals and gaps.
Yeah, so it's through data, we have realized, data gathering in our organization, that the gender piece is clear, everybody understands it, everybody supports it. But what we have seen, the ethnicity and the LGBTQI area, is our employees are asking for more awareness around that. And so the recruitment that I mentioned, recruiters are taken through inclusive behaviors for the broadest form of diversity. We have really stood out in our region. We proactively sponsor gay Pride Weeks across all of our markets, even in those markets that are definitely coming from behind. We operate in the Baltics, Lithuania borders Belarus. What's going on there. We really took a stand through Pride, through work we're doing on digital inclusion as well, on really calling out against cybercrime against minorities in general, and spoken out publicly, so much so that we were awarded the most LGBTQI employer in the region by the region's biggest union last year. So really, our values are there to embrace everyone. Our culture is there to allow everyone to succeed, no matter who they are, and to bring out the best of everyone that we have. And then because we're one of the biggest employers in all of the markets we operate in, we purposely take a stand where we think there is unfairness in society.
And it's great that you do that. And when it comes to addressing these broader aspects of discrimination, what do you believe? Do you tackle them individually? Do you think some of the barriers, LGBTQI, race, we've discussed gender, are there common barriers that you tackle individually, or do you knit it all together to eliminate discrimination as a whole? And talk us through your views on that, and then, the different things that organizations, leaders, managers, and stakeholders need to do.
Well, I think, first of all, we make it very clear at recruitment and on joining that, one of the most important parts of our culture is that everybody needs to be treated fairly. And so we have online training that our employees have to go through every year, just to remind them of how people can feel if they are treated in an unfair way. And so it's expected that everybody is an equal, no matter their background. And that is very much the culture of the Nordics. Mm-hmm. And then, because we have a very open culture, we very much encourage people to speak up when they feel as though they've been discriminated against. So we have speak up lines, and because of this open culture, our people are very open to go on to internal social media and external social media when they do see an opportunity. And we have our pulse surveys and we have our speak up lines where we address any specific issues. To be honest, I don't see the issues in the Telia that I see in a company like BT, actually. And I think part of it is cultural, because of the societies that we operate in. But in Telia, when we see a problem, just as in BT, when they see a problem, and through surveys, you see if there's certain parts of the organization where there's increased complaints or there's increased calls into speak up line, then we take immediate action to fix it. But it has to start with everybody feeling safe to speak up. And that starts from the culture that you introduce them to on the first day in the company. And then through the regular, when we do pulse surveys, it's expected that every manager spends time with their immediate team going through, what is the pulse telling us about our team? What, are we going forwards, backwards? How do we benchmark versus the best? What are we doing to address some of our gaps? And in those pulse surveys, we're regularly asking people, do they feel no matter their background, that they have a fair chance to succeed and be themselves in Telia? Yeah.
And how often do you run those pulse surveys?
We are, as a result of COVID and because of more online tools, we're actually running them more often. So I think last year we did 4. So it's no longer just once a year. And then we've got the ability now with the new software, if we spot a specific problem, that we can go and do a very short survey. So that's what we did even more so last year on COVID, just to check in on people. Do you feel supported? Are you equipped to be able to operate from home? So we probably did an extra 4 surveys last year in amongst the normal 4 to just touch base with people because they'd had to work from home for so long.
Yeah, now that's a great bridge into my next question, which is about the role of technology and data in accelerating progress to help address the gender, ethnicity, age, disability, LGBTQ, and other forms of discrimination. You mentioned the ability to do rapid surveys. What other ways, as a technology company, do you see technology and data helping companies to address these issues?
Well, I think we are finally getting much better quality data on our workforce, provided the workforce want to give you that data. And that's always the issue. It's easy to get gender data, but it's not as easy to get some of the other data points. And certainly in countries like Sweden, you're not allowed to ask certain questions of people. But what we try to do, therefore, is encourage forums where we start to see the interest from our organization on whether it be age or whether LGBTQ issues. And so we have hosted a number of virtual events, and based on that, we can see who's interested and who's engaging in our organization. But yeah, data's great if you can get the right data.
Yeah.
And that's something that we need to get more of. Google probably know more about our employees than we do.
Yeah, that is not the truth, and Facebook. But yeah. So you mentioned in Sweden you're not allowed to ask. Is it the case that you can't ask employees to volunteer that?
You can ask them to volunteer.
Yeah.
They are still, the Swedes are very private, but yes.
Okay. Because certainly that's what a lot of folks say is that if your employees understand what you're going to do with the data and that you're not going to use it to any way discriminate against them, but rather to make sure that you, going back to your core point of, are representing the society that you're in, they're maybe more willing to share with you. Have you found that?
Yes, yes, absolutely. By volunteering it's better. But you're constantly told you can't force it. But we are generally getting better data. But there's still in parts of our footprint that people don't want to admit their ethnic backgrounds, and that's a tragedy. So we've got to make them feel safe to admit their backgrounds. And they don't change that. Sadly, you've got people in society, they feel they have to change their names from what their birth names. And we have to move away from that. And I hope that Telia as an employer, encourages everybody to be their best selves, but we've got more to do as society.
Yeah. And then just very briefly, you mentioned you felt Telia had different societal norms and challenges than BT, the board you're on. What springs to mind as one of the biggest differences in those societal cultural challenges?
I think it's just there has been historically much less inequality in countries like Sweden and Norway and Denmark, because there has been caps on executive pay. Everybody gets access to great health, education, everything. So I think we start at a very different point from a societal point of view. And clearly we have a relatively more homogenous ethnicity in the Nordics than you get. There's much more diversity in the UK than there is certainly in Norway and Denmark, where there's not as much ethnicity and diversity. Sweden, there is more because they took in more refugees back in 2015. So I think Sweden will be like the UK in maybe 10, 15 years from now, because you're starting to see, and COVID has furthered that, and you know, the wealth generation that has happened in Sweden as a result of the unicorns that have developed up there, and the rise of tech and the rise of private equity, and the old standards for being cap on executive pay is actually disappearing in the world of big tech and the world of private equity. And so I think you will see increasing inequality in coming years. And it's actually becoming a big issue in the upcoming elections. There's a general election next year, and you're seeing Sweden in particular starting to be concerned about the implications of the rising inequality that's been accelerated during COVID.
Yeah, sure. And of course, Klarna springs to mind as that a very famous example of
Exactly.
the unicorn. But you mentioned government, and I just want to move on now to some COVID learnings. Couple of questions. What do you think governments and political leaders have learned from COVID-19 about the importance of management? And what do you think society has learned about the importance of management? And then what have you learned as a leader about your own leadership and management since COVID?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, government should recognize the resilience of management to keep businesses and societies operating, despite the fact that everybody had to go remote and virtual so quickly. So I think that is, you know, it's been, if COVID had happened 10, 15 years ago, the world would not have been able to cope so well. You know, we didn't. I'm operating from my bedroom in Windsor today because my husband's in the study. You know, we wouldn't have been able to do this without gathering. So I think governments need to recognize that business leaders and the many managers and leaders in their organizations really stepped up and helped government, helped society, helped their friends and families operate. So I think that's one big thing. I think what society has to learn, though, is this is not going to be the first pandemic. And climate, you know, the issues we have with climate change is going to make more of this happen in the future. So society needs to think about what can it do to reduce these shocks happening, or what do they have to do to build resilience to these shocks? But clearly a focus on climate is absolutely critical. And then what did I learn? Well, I learned that, you know, you can be appointed as a new CEO in a new company and operate for 18 months with only seeing a handful of your people. But I did learn that I'm really missing not being together with people. I'm an extrovert and I get energy from people. I probably scale more on the EQ side of IQ in terms of my competencies. And so I learn a lot from watching and being with people, and you don't get the same on a screen. And I don't get that same energy from a screen. So I've learned that I need to be with people, but I coped. But it's not as much fun as when you're actually gathering together to collaborate on things together. And I think that's extremely important when we think about the coaching of the next generation. How do we ensure that, you know, as we go back to offices and back to hybrid working, that we really prioritize the coaching and development of the young managers and the young people that need to learn from us oldies that have been around for a bit longer.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of coaching, I know that you, because we've discussed this before, had a great sponsor in your career. So what impact did it have? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, absolutely. I wouldn't be where I am today if a couple of people hadn't spotted a talent in me and either mentored me or sponsored or encouraged me along the way. And the one that you and I know best, you know, I went to be his number 2 in finance, but he really wanted to have a female CFO of Procter & Gamble UK, and so he put a lot of effort in my development, my exposure, and he encouraged me out of my comfort zone. And then he encouraged me to move beyond finance and into general management. He really sponsored and supported me along the way. I wasn't the obvious candidate to become the CFO of Procter & Gamble UK, but he really sponsored me to get there. And then I wasn't the obvious candidate, being an accountant, to go and run Procter & Gamble's luxury hair care business, the professional hair care business with Wella, because I'd never worked in the hairdressing industry. I'd never been a general manager before, and I was an accountant. And he saw that I would be a great fit for the customers that were so important to us in that industry. So he sponsored me into that as well. And that gave me the step up from finance and got my first general management experience that allowed me to build on for the future. So sponsorship has been critical. And another great sponsor was Jeremy Darroch at Sky. You know, he was the person that interviewed me at Procter & Gamble. And he was the one that said, well, she doesn't have a degree and she didn't fill in her form totally, but there's something there. And then because he personally put himself on the line recommending hiring me, he was a great sponsor to me in my early days at Procter & Gamble. He wanted me to be a success because that showed that he was great at spotting talent and developing leaders himself. And that's what he's continued to do throughout his career.
Which is amazing. And of course, the other sponsor you mentioned is none other than Chris de la Puente, who's now obviously the chairman and CEO of LVMH Cosmetics and Beauty. So 2 great sponsors. And, you know, you're right. They spotted that in you. And sponsors do talk about you. Mentors talk with
Yes.
you. So they advocate for you when you're not in the room. And it's so important for progression. And, you know, obviously you're proof of that.
I think it was something that, you know, not many organizations actually value is, you know, you and I our success was measured not just on our business results, but in our ability to develop the organization that we worked in so that it was sustainable beyond you as a person. And I think great managers need to be great at not just managing the business, but managing and developing their people so that they're creating the managers and the leaders of the future. And you know, going back to an earlier comment on engagement, we need to hire people that want to develop their people so that they can be proud of them in the future. I get so much reward out of seeing the people that I helped in the early stages of their career go on to bigger and better things. That's almost more rewarding than actually running telcos sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. Now, who inspires you as a leader? I mean, you've mentioned a couple of your sponsors, presumably they inspire you, but if you look out on the horizon, is there somebody that stands out, and why is that?
I think I have different inspiration for different contexts, and I still get a huge amount of inspiration out of the many leaders, wonderful leaders that we worked with at Procter & Gamble, and following their careers and seeing what they've gone on to do has inspired me. So seeing others change companies for the better, have impact in the societies they work on. So there's a great range of inspirational people, too many to mention. But yeah. I think because I believe as a manager in an organization or a leader of an organization, I'm only as good as what I can give back to that company. I'm always looking at other great leaders that have developed their businesses successfully. So I look at like Börje Ekholm, who went in to run Ericsson. You know, he'd been running the private equity division of one of the biggest families in Sweden before, and they urgently needed to change the leadership of Ericsson, and he went in to do it, and he's done a phenomenal job during a very difficult time for the industry with geopolitics and everything. And I look at him being, you know, a PE guy and private equity guy that hadn't run a huge business before, and you're running an international business that's got into battles with China and governments and everything, and he's done a phenomenal job. So I've got many examples.
That's great. And yes, you're a learner and you're curious, which is obviously a key characteristic of a great leader as well. Okay, we're going to get big for a while in my next question. What would a better, fairer society look like to you? And what are you doing to make this happen?
Clearly, a better, fairer society allows everybody to have a chance to grow and develop, no matter their background and where they come from. And so a better, fairer society for me would ensure that everybody gets a great education, that everybody gets access to great healthcare, and that everybody and everybody really values respect for the individual, no matter who or what they are. So, and I think, you know, we as an industry have got a massive role to play in that, because whilst there has been, you know, digitalization and big tech and technology has allowed so many great things to develop, it actually has created so much narcissism and nasty stuff. And so as a company, we've got, and me personally, I've got, I think personally, I really focus on how do we get every kid to get a great education, because that was so important for me. But professionally, it's about how do I ensure that the platforms that we develop and give access to our customers we're protecting the vulnerable, we're driving digital inclusion, and we take a stance against anything that is wrong and discriminatory and dangerous on our platforms. And then from an inclusivity point of view, we're putting a lot of effort into helping the elderly be able to use digital tools, helping the SME enterprises, you know, small hairdressers that maybe don't have the same technical skills, educating them on how to use digital tools to become more efficient, to raise the profile of their businesses. And then and we actually have programs working in the communities with the elderly and with the small SMEs on that. And sometimes it's working in partnership with government and local municipalities. And then in schools where we're teaching the digital passports for children. So we teach them how to stay safe online, and they get a passport at the end of it. And part of that is also talking to your parents about what you see online. So, you know, our purpose is to reinvent better. We have a responsibility to ensure that this digital world is truly better by working on many digital inclusion initiatives.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to hear you say that. It's all so important because there is that dark side. And so we have to be, as business as you, as a tech leader, really do need to be very proactive. And it's great to see that you are. Okay, last question. Your message. Could you please, in your own words, summarize what you think the impact that great managers and leaders make every day? You know, what would be your advice, one piece of advice for government?
Managers shape the culture of the workplace. Governments should use that culture as impact for good and for improvement. And we need to work more in partnership with government on some of the challenges that we now face, whether that is climate or whether that is inequality, which you can hear is my big passion. And I do believe governments need to work much more in partnership with business and the leaders and managers in organizations to really truly understand what is going on, because sometimes our civil servants are not in touch with society. But because good managers working in strong businesses with strong cultures can bring so much good impact if they have a collective purpose. And I encourage government to work with those managers, particularly as we face climate change and inequality. And let's use COP26, and being a Glaswegian, why don't we use that as a platform for government to be working in partnership with business on some of the biggest challenges we face, and use it as a platform to really start to address inequality, leveling up. And climate is a fantastic opportunity for us to start to create new employment for everybody to go and work in together.
Excellent. Allison, thank you so much. You've been an inspiration. It's been great to hear your views on all of these big topics. I think, you're absolutely right. We've all got our part to play to work together. And actually, we've all got to dare and care as we go forward. I love that expression. Lovely to talk to you. If you've enjoyed this broadcast and you're not a CMI member, please consider joining our community. You'll find out more on how to do so in the chat. And thank you for joining this special 75th anniversary broadcast with Rockstar CEO Allison Kirkby. Take care.